Good afternoon. Hopefully everybody's there, for those who can see me live as well as can hear me through the webinar. My name is Greg Watson, and I'm with the Economic Development Coalition of Southwest Indiana. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. And I'm just going to do a quick introduction, talk to you about some of the why of what we're doing, and then we'll lead into the consulting team. But let me first just sort of introduce the consulting team for you, and then we'll get to them just in a moment. Dean Whitaker is leading the team with Whitaker Associates, and Dean is president and CEO and founder of Whitaker Associates. Dean has had a long history of economic development and working in the field in Illinois throughout the country, and his firm is based in Holland, Michigan. Another part of the team is Kara DeBott, and Kara is the founder of Pareto People. They're based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. She has over 10 years specifically in talent acquisition and recruitment, and primarily does that work within Silicon Valley. And she's based, as I said before, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A couple of other members who are part of the team is Jason Sosa, and this is part of the aspect of what we're doing with regard to social media in the piece. And Jason is the founder and CEO of Blackbox AI, previously founder CEO of IMRSV, a venture-backed emotion recognition company acquired by Karios in 2015. Again, he's works New York extensively, but is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And one of his partners is a European partner. It's Avalio Harliev, and we call him Ivo for short. And he has 10 years of specific in working in digital marketing. Is really a guru in Facebook, and we've really relied upon Ivo to help us through that process. And internally, we have Sabrina Newton, and Sabrina is our manager of strategic communications and marketing, but is taken on as part of this pilot project and why this is so important. Let me just talk to you just briefly about why. Most of the talent initiatives that we've been looking at have been, or that are working within our region, have been long-term talent initiatives. Those kind of initiatives where we'll help you fill the pipeline in the next 2 to 3 years. The reality is, and for all of you on the line, and for those who, in particular, as we work with companies, there's a real immediate need for talent. And we felt that no one was trying to address that immediate need as much. And so we thought there has to be a good way to reach these individuals with regard to the utilization of social media, but also that it was strategic and data-driven, but it would allow us to expand the geography of what we think of as a talent pool for Southwest Indiana. Now, we chose 5 companies as pilot companies because we wanted to test a couple of things, and we only looked at 2 occupational sectors in terms of, we looked at registered nurses and industrial maintenance. We wanted to, one, validate the use of data-driven and strategic social media, but it also allowed us, by keeping it small, to hone the process, get it in place, and once we validated it, we look at it, how do we scale it out to a much larger community, and looking at it as adding a significant tool into our box to help us expand the geography of how we look at talent. So let me turn it over to Dean. Hopefully that's a good introduction to you, Dean, and you can take us through the next process.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon and with your participants, both on in your training room as well as those that are online. So I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to do that. What I'd like to do this afternoon is to talk a little bit just about an overview of the pilot project itself and how we went about structuring it. And then each of our individual partners will talk about their role and some of the things they've learned. But the overview of the project was really an idea of a test. And we were testing the use, as you said, Greg, a data-driven approach using the skill sets of a team of people to address the 2 basic skills needs that we focused on, which were, as you said, the industrial maintenance, and then also on the registered nurses. So those are the 2 categories that we set off to look at. We also experimented with layoff data. The layoff notices are federally required filings of companies laying people off. So we looked at that data as part of our efforts, but we also then applied social media marketing in a broader way. And then we also identified and are working with Kara Debat, who's a recruiter. So it's a combination of data, social media marketing, and a recruiter that we were experimenting with. The objective was really, as you said, Greg, to see if we could expand the labor market, the size of the labor market for your organization's region. And again, using a targeted marketing approach to target individuals using social media. The first step in our pilot was to gather data. So we were very interested to find out what the skill sets were that were in most demand. And that's kind of how we focused on the two that we did. And then the next step was to identify candidates using social media marketing and create a database of respondents, of which Sabrina will talk a little bit more about the number and how she went about creating that database. And then we had a follow-up process where we actually contacted each of the respondents to the social media marketing campaign. So that's kind of a bit of the overview of what we did. A couple of things that we were wondering about, and there were a lot of questions that we started out with, and most research starts out with a good question, but we were curious to know what kind of skills were in most demand. And there's quite a broad array of those. There's over 6,000 open positions in the Evansville region, according to Indeed.com, in a wide variety of fields. The other thing we were wondering about is how long does it take to hire someone from beginning to end? From the time the person applies, how long does it take before that person's on the job? So that was one of our questions we were wondering about. And also, what kind of experience does an applicant have when they go through this process? Each company is different, is one of the things we've learned. But what kind of experience does this person who's applying for that position have? And then who's responsible for recruiting in each of these companies? Who's got that as on their job description that they're responsible for recruiting new people? And how many people are in the pipeline? We were curious to know. And the last question that I'll mention, what are some of the hurdles that individuals are having as they try to go about finding talent, and how can we help address some of those hurdles? When we began exploring ways to use social media platforms, we looked at LinkedIn and Facebook primarily, and we were trying to figure out how can we engage potential applicants in a conversation about the opportunities in Evansville. Social media platforms, as many of us know, have invaded our lives. They've become the most comprehensive database of personal information on the planet. And we tapped into that data set in terms of our targeted marketing. Using the power of the data and using targeting individuals or groups based on demographics, psychographics, and geographic variables. That's kind of how we approached it. And Sabrina will talk much more about the use of the social media because that was really her area. Back up. One of the things we've learned in this whole process, it's still about people in the end, and recruiting is still a personal business, and it takes someone with respect, authenticity, and a genuine interest in the applicant's welfare to be a good recruiter. And the third member of our team, as I mentioned, for our pilot project was Kara, and Kara really brings a wealth of experience, both from the West Coast and also from our Midwest clients, and she'll talk a little more about what she does and how she goes about that aspect of it. But in working with Kara on the pilot project, I learned a few things that were aha for me, and that is recruiting is a very unique aspect of human capital. It's sometimes under an umbrella organization called human resources, but it really seldom fits there. It's almost like its own entity in terms of how it functions, and it's a really interesting, and she'll get into a little bit more detail on that issue. Most organizations are still operating under the old paradigm where there was 100 people for every open position, and are yet to redesign their hiring process in a world where there's a skill shortage. And how do they address that issue when they're currently set up to really filter people out rather than recruit people in? A couple other things we've come across in some of the issues for what the talent attraction challenges are, and that's really the demographics, the retirement of the baby boomers. Some of the companies we're working with are going to lose 25% of their key personnel in the next 3 years. And we see that over and over happening. When you look around your organization, what percentage of your coworkers are going to be eligible to retire in the next 3 years or the next 5? Generally, we hear 25% of the people will be eligible to retire in the next 3 years and over 50% in the next 5. So when you start thinking about this shift in the baby boomers as they are eligible to retire, if they choose to, there's going to be quite a challenge to fill those positions that are going to become vacant. Remember, there are 10,000 baby boomers are eligible to retire every day for the next 20 years. So it's a huge shift in the talent pool that's going to take place among the baby boomers. One of the other things that we've noted in our pilot project and also in other places, but is there's kind of a power shift. It used to be the company was in charge and the applicant was kind of at their beck and call. Well, that power game is shifting, and it's more now about more balanced. You're trying to recruit somebody, but they're also trying to evaluate you as a company. Is this a place I want to work? How do they treat their people? What do other people say about this working at this company? And is this the place that they're going to be helping me develop my career? So there's kind of a shift going on in terms of the power structure or the power relative to how social media or how people are applying for positions and what they're looking for. The last thing I'll mention is really think about it in terms of what's the applicant's experience when they apply for a position with your company. How does it feel? Try to be a little bit empathetic if you can. How long does it take from the time they apply until they're actually on the job? How long did it take you from the time you applied at your company until you were hired? And how long do you think a millennial will wait to receive a job offer? When I've asked my millennial friends that question, they said, well, if a job we really, really want, we'll wait 2 weeks. If a job we're kind of lukewarm on, we'll wait 1 week before we move on. And when I ask the generation behind them, they say 1 or 2 days. So what we're seeing is a process that can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months before somebody is onboarded in a company. And you see that the people that are being recruited are willing to wait 1 or 2 weeks. So there's kind of a shift going on there. Excuse me. So in terms of our data-driven recruitment pilot project, it has helped us evaluate some of the new tools and techniques for attracting, retaining talent for the region. We've determined some of the critical skills the gaps that are existing, and we've been developing a process to find and recruit individuals. Now that's kind of where we've been this past 4 months as we've tested out this process and how do we go about attracting and more importantly, how do you go about retaining some of the employments? Next step is still yet to be determined, but one of the things we're looking at is, can we scale this process from being a pilot project with 5 companies and a couple professional sectors that we're recruiting? Can we scale this into a larger application where we're looking at more and more people as they look at the broader needs of each of the companies within the region? So that's kind of what I've set out to do. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of our webinar. So after about 60 minutes of presentations, we'll save about 30 minutes for Q&A. And there is a Q&A section. If you look at your control panel on the right-hand side, you'll see a drop down there where it says questions. If you have questions as they occur, you can type them in there, or you can wait until the end and put your question in. We will ask you to type in your questions because once having a bunch of open mics is really distracting. So we would ask that you would type in your questions into the questions box on your control panel. Next, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Sabrina Newton, who will talk a little more about the social media marketing aspect of it and how she went about doing that. Can you find Sabrina on here? You got Sabrina?
Okay, are we good to go?
Yep, want to show your screen, Sabrina?
Can you see it now?
You can?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hello, my name's Sabrina Newton. And just wanted to share a little bit about our experience with Facebook. The coalition embarked on this talent pilot program with a lot of optimism. When I first heard about the concept of this potential unconventional way to attract talent to Southwest Indiana, I was like, wow, this could be a transformational process. And the coalition is all about transformation. As we began to explore companies to participate in pilot, we were encouraged by their responses as well. Light bulbs were going off and everyone wanted to be a part of the action. As I like to say from time to time, if nothing changes, nothing changes. What's great about this is what we're learning about this valuable tool. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how we got started with social media, mainly in Facebook, and where this process took us. I'll also mention a few new platforms along the way that Jason Sosa helped us uncover that are noteworthy and that could assist you in managing projects or simply jazzing up your everyday workflow. After our team met with the leaders of the pilot companies and had discussions with their HR and talent acquisition teams, the consensus was to help attract potential candidates in two areas, nurses and maintenance mechanics, as these positions seem to be the toughest in which to attract candidates. We were guided by our consultant to focus on three main areas: demographics, which are the age, marital status, etc., geographics, and psychographics, which is the mindset, what Facebook pages do they like, what brands do they follow. Enter Extensio. This is a platform you can use to create documents, landing pages, presentations, all collaboratively. They have a number of templates that can get you started quickly. With Extensio, we created personas, which are fictional characters based upon research in order to represent the different prospective candidates. Creating personas helped us to understand a potential candidate's behavior, goals, and frustrations. We created personas of both nurses and maintenance workers by interviewing people who currently held these positions, and we researched others through Facebook with the same job descriptions. After our personas were complete, we were ready to build landing pages. The landing page would be the vehicle to capture the contact information for people who clicked on the Facebook ads. We use the platform Unbounce. The great thing about Unbounce is not only the quick method of creating a page, but you can effectively A/B test pages for on-point messaging and images. You can also see how many people viewed the pages. With this method, the lead would have to click the Facebook ad, read the landing page, fill out their contact information if they chose to do so, and submit it. Using our personas, we crafted the ads using compelling images and simple yet focused messages that would focus on pain points, goals, and perhaps other connections and interests in new careers in Southwest Indiana. We used a variety of online tools for images such as Canva, Adobe Stock, and Unsplash. This is a free high-resolution photography website. It's pretty cool. Check it out. Even Facebook advertising has stock photography to choose from. Our ads delivered in a variety of different places. For example, a 100-mile radius of Evansville, major nearby cities like Louisville, Indy, St. Louis, Chicago, as well as using the WARN notice criteria of companies laying off nurses and maintenance mechanics. On some ads, we included targeting to those people with connections back to our community, either through family or through college affiliations. Here's a nurse's ad that did pretty well. Through this ad, we were able to reach potential leads through Facebook, Instagram, Audience Network, which are third-party apps and websites that utilize Facebook, and Messenger. A few of the interests based on our personas we targeted were nursing, marriage, marathons, millennials, and home ownership. That's just a snapshot of the criteria available. You can dive down deeper than you ever wanted to go through Facebook marketing. In total, there were 7 different ad campaigns with a variety of ads within each campaign. For example, one ad was just for nurses. That campaign contained 2 ad sets with different targeting. Within each of the ad sets, there were multiple ads with different images. Along with having campaigns for nurses and maintenance mechanics, we thought it beneficial to have a general campaign promoting the Southwest Indiana region, its great schools, and the low cost of living. We were able to deliver these general ads to almost 8,000 people outside of our market. While this was not the goal of the pilot project, this brought new leads to us as well. Even a conversation with a Connecticut Chamber of Commerce executive that stated that Central Connecticut universities were producing too many nurses and maintenance mechanics, and that they were looking for solutions for those students looking to venture out of state. The coalition is currently pursuing these connections. Shortly into the launch of the ad campaigns, we discovered a function within Facebook that would cut out a step to collect contact information. Facebook offers a contact form within the ad after the potential lead clicks on the call to action. This is when things really started to get fun for us around here. This would take out an entire step and would prove to be a game changer. Leads that were just trickling in began to multiply daily. The campaign ran for 6 weeks and generated 185 leads. Now, you are looking at a snapshot of a real-time data platform that was put together using Gecko Board for this project that's been pulled from Facebook Ad Manager. This simply reflects Facebook advertising and not LinkedIn, which I think we'll be adding that to this board at a later date. Jason will show us how to do that. You'll see the campaign had 901,200 impressions. That means our ads were served up that many times through Facebook, Instagram, Audience Network, and Messenger. The reach was 268,500, the people that saw the ads. And we are very pleased with these numbers and look forward to the second phase now being discussed. Now, what this Gecko Board doesn't show you is the number of people who viewed the landing pages, and which equals about 10,000 people for all of the landing pages that we created for nurses and maintenance mechanics. We're following up the leads generated by Facebook and hope to receive more resumes that we can pass along. Now, Facebook is a one-to-many approach to recruiting, but LinkedIn is very different. Now, on our LinkedIn marketing, to hit the highlights, we utilize LinkedIn and LinkedIn Recruiter to promote a one-to-one strategy for talent acquisition for nurses and maintenance mechanics. And here are a few of the strategies. We contacted companies affected by layoffs through Walter, which is the database of WARN notices that Whitaker and Associates created. State agencies that help place people affected by WARN notices, and we were added to that database as somebody that people could contact. Reaching out to people whose profiles seem likely for layoff. Reaching out to those that fit the nurse and maintenance mechanic profile who attended a secondary education institution within 100 miles. And this really had a good effect. I believe Kara will follow up on those results, but this was just a great project. And here's a potential candidate right here, Jordan Gary, for maintenance technician. He works in the plastics field. And so that's kind of like what you're looking at through Recruiter. And you're able to do a search and find folks like this and then add them to a project list and be able to send them emails through LinkedIn. And I really appreciate being able to work this project. It's been really great, and I will turn it over to Greg.
Okay, I think at this point we're moving on to Kara, are we not? Okay, so but I did just want to reemphasize one point which I think is really important. As we were looking at all these kinds of talent initiatives that are happening within the marketplace, a lot of them again were long-term or they focus purely on training somebody that might exist out there. We look specifically at how do we expand the geography of the potential talent pool. And CareitBot has really helped us rethink specifically looking at talent acquisition versus just looking at compliance of an HR function. So Kara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Oh, we need to play this here. There we go. Is that going to go away? You guys see my screen? Let's see. No. Well, I guess we'll have to watch that then. I'm not sure why that is there. Can I get rid of it? Cancel. Well, I guess it will just sort of be in the way. Maybe we can move it out of the way here.
We don't see anything, Kara. It looks good. Go right ahead.
All right. Okay, so everyone can see that. What is recruiting? Yeah, good. Okay. So we're going to talk about recruiting. It seems like a pretty basic thing, but there's a lot to it. And I think part of what's made recruiting more important recently, or at least stand out as being very important, and kind of emerge from what people have thought of as something to be a traditional HR function, is really just the changing of the times and sort of that power shift. A lot has happened in the economy, and then just with, you know, the increase of technology and how that helps us do our jobs. And so we've gone from an economy where perhaps companies, manufacturing companies, you know, hospitals have been used to receiving tons of interest in their positions. So a lot of the process has been made to basically sort of weed people out, create a lot of steps for people to go through, versus now, what do you do when there's nobody in a pipeline and nobody's applying, and then you have this sort of cumbersome process? So we'll talk a little bit about why this has happened and how we can adjust to that now. Then this would be an example of maybe some processes that exist currently, but that were created some time ago with the intention of honestly getting rid of a lot of candidates. For those who have been in the recruiting function, you know that when you receive applicants, if you receive even 30 applicants, 100, 1,000, thousands, it can be quite overwhelming and time consuming to have to go through all of those applications, especially when, in just pulling a number out of my hat here, like 50, 70% are just not even qualified. Maybe have no qualifications or some qualifications. You wonder if they've even read the job description before applying. So it's very time consuming. And in addition, having lots of different, you know, kind of laws about how you can reach out to people and who you should talk to, created a lot of companies to just outsource this function. Companies like Google will, you know, basically hire contractors to do it, and all day they'll just look through resumes. Some RPOs will do the whole gamut of recruiting function to even include screening candidates. But basically saying, help us weed through this pipeline, help us identify at least the people who are minimally qualified for this job. That, of course, is going to take some time. So who knows how efficient that process is? Maybe it's the same day that you applied. I think most of us who applied for jobs have not had that experience. So it could be months. Who knows? Then we go to, is the candidate still interested? If they are, then maybe they need to go take a work skills test, or they need to, you know, go do something else in the process to confirm that they're interested. They come back in. You know, some processes will do like a group panel. So sometimes interviews won't even get scheduled until maybe you have so many people on a list waiting. You go through the group panel, then you go to the interview, then you go to the offer and to the hire. So it's a really great process. If you have 1,000 candidates entering it, it's a really cumbersome, long process and not a great one for helping to identify star candidates. Like, where in this process would you be able to identify the best candidate for a position? You really probably aren't going to until you get to the interview phase. who's responsible for it, where in this process is the main driver. What if the candidate has an offer at group panel and they need something to be scheduled sooner? It's just very difficult, which is fine, again, if you have 1,000 candidates. I think most of us are not experiencing that. If you are, then probably not on this webinar. So here's what we're seeing in a lot of cases. Funnels that even maybe a year ago or 6 months ago had candidates in them have nothing. So if you have a process like that, then you have a recruiting funnel that looks like this and you have no applicants, what do you do? That's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. These are some of the suggestions we'll sort of be going through, but there's a lot of things you can do, at the top of the funnel to help attract candidates, to help identify candidates for job posting campaigns, getting out there into the social media world, onto the internet, doing some social media marketing like Sabrina just talked about, using the layoff database that Whitaker and Associates and Sabrina just talked about. Employee referral programs are huge and one of the very best ways to find candidates, because obviously if you have employees, they know the culture of the company, they know other people, perhaps they can help bring people in. We'll talk a little more about active and passive candidates, but basically going out and searching for people who aren't looking for jobs, who are happy, who are doing well. And then, of course, recruiting agencies as well. We'll also talk about, even if you can feed this pipeline, what do you do internally to make sure that you're identifying the right candidates, that you're hiring the right candidates, that you're able to compete for talent in this market. So we'll talk about how to do that, how you need a clear owner of recruiting, kind of resources that you might need to put into it. A common theme you'll see across all of this is really thinking about the candidate experience. Very, very important, especially with different generations, and kind of how we measure the time we spend at work is with how we feel when we're there and how our experience was getting there. Looking at efficient and effective processes and the ability to be able to sell top candidates, and then also being able to measure. How do you measure success? How do you measure effectiveness of a process of recruiting? I mean, ultimately you have hires, but there's a whole lot along the way. Actually, I want to go back there real quick. So I think a couple more things involved in that. For those of you who are at the Talent Summit a couple months ago in Evansville, we had Kim Lear, who I just thought was amazing. And she presented on basically generational differences between people and talked a lot about how, Generation X and millennials and then Gen Z are just very different from the baby boomer generation, but a lot of these, policies I think were crafted around. They care a lot about work-life balance. They care a lot about the culture of the company they're going to work for. They care about diversity. It's a huge thing right now, everywhere, but especially in the Bay Area. How do we talk about diversity and inclusion, and having teams that are diverse make for better, more creative decisions, or make for better outcomes. And there's even a thing called unconscious bias. So is our interview process sort of unconsciously, we're bringing in bias to it that we don't even realize we're doing. Sometimes even the job descriptions that we write can show that, using more male-dominated language versus more female language. So it's a lot of information there. Part of what sort of changes as well is just technology. So not only how technology helps us do our jobs, but also how people look for new jobs and what they're going to go find before they apply. For example, we have some stats in here, but a lot of people actually explore companies, look for jobs, and actually apply for jobs on their mobile phones. So what does your application system look like? Is it something you can even do on a mobile device? Do you have a good mobile site for people to look at? In fact, I was just telling a story the other day about we had posted a job for a VP role that I was working on in my business. And the way the candidate ended up coming to us because he saw that job posting, but did not apply to it. And instead did a bunch of research online about the company, identified the product from something that their child was using, went and talked to a venture capital firm that had invested in that company to kind of do a back channel reference, and then finally asked that company, that venture capital company, to introduce them to the company itself. So that's a lot of what's happening on the back end, is that research, trying to figure out if it's a company worth investing apparently 2 weeks of your life if you're a millennial. Another interesting thing too, particular to the manufacturing sector, when Kim Lear was in town, I had the pleasure of talking to her for a little while, and she had said they had done some research on the manufacturing sector specifically. It said parents who are in those positions, like a maintenance mechanic, for example, were actually discouraging their children from going into that field. One, because of job security, that they didn't know if the jobs would be around that much more, opportunities for growth. It was something that, you know, if you're 18-something, 20-something, you go to your parent who's done that for their career, they're going to discourage you from going there. So create some really interesting opportunities for those companies to think about, you know, how do we bring this person in and then offer them a career path, offer them training into maybe robotics in the future, or, you know, who knows, or today, depending on what you're doing. So I think the point of this whole thing and the theme that I want everyone to think about is just that this is really hard. Even in my business, one of my biggest challenges is recruiting. I know it's sort of ironic, but finding the right talent is very difficult, especially in this really competitive landscape. There's maybe not enough talent to go around. The good people are even harder to attract and retain. There's things we need to look at in addition to skills like, you know, values, company culture fit, diversity and recruiting, you know, retention, and just a whole host of things. So it's doable. It's difficult, but you know, we can do it. Next one, talent acquisition and the recruiting spectrum. So again, kind of basic. I mean, talent acquisition is fairly obvious. Recruiting is obvious. You're bringing new people, attracting and bringing in new people to an organization. I think what's different in some ways is that recruiting is very much, you can either think of it like a specialty, or it's really kind of its own area. When you think about HR, a lot of human resources, or a lot of what we're calling people function now, a lot of that has to do with compliance with laws, making sure that, you know, we're doing things that are appropriate, not outside the scope of you know, the laws set in this country, making sure that once employees are in, that they're compensated fairly, that they're treated fairly, that they have a growth path, hopefully, you know, maybe that they have some training and development, which can branch off into a different area, maybe even like company culture, making sure that you have a fun and stimulating environment for people to work in, or whatever is, you know, kind of fitting with your values. There's a whole offboarding, you know, making sure terminations and that kind of stuff are going all right as well. Working with employee relations issues, you know, maybe union stuff, just a whole host of things for HR to work on a daily basis. Recruiting can fall under that, but really it's in a lot of ways like a very different skill set. In recruiting, what we're looking at is marketing, branding, trying to attract candidates. And a lot of that is in partnership with HR. You know, we'll want to know what skills these people are going to need once they come in, what kind of performance evaluations are they going to have, what does the team structure look like. So there's a lot of overlap and collaboration that we'll talk about, but it's very different. And to that end, pretty important to have basically representation of recruiting at the executive level. If you sort of think about, if you have a job that's open and, you know, somebody's out of that position and it's open today, and then you go to recruiting and let them know, or you post the job online, you're already behind the ball, right? Even if you found the candidate today, how long does your process take? Does it take 4 weeks, 6 months? Let's say it took 2 weeks, which would be a good process. Then the person gives 2 weeks notice. So already you're 4 weeks behind because you had that need today. So yes, investing in recruiting and talent acquisition, it takes resources. But what's the cost of not doing that? It's sort of an important question, not only the cost of the unfilled positions, but you know, the length of time that takes. So this is kind of I guess a visual of some of what I'm talking about for those of you who like visualizations a little bit better. And also want to explain some of the terms that I'm using. So you'll see on the bottom here, we have the candidate experience. I put this here because really your candidate is experiencing everything on a sort of consumer level, if you will, especially having access to the internet where information about your company lives 24/7. So you have your website, you have maybe a Facebook site, or at least you have people who are posting about working for your company, good or bad, that people may know. You know, you have Crunchbase, which might talk about the company. Maybe you have LinkedIn postings or, you know, articles out there, stock market, whatever. We then also at the top here, we have the hiring manager. And so this is the person who really is going to feel the pain of having an open position. So this is going to vary, I guess, depending on, you know, the company and the role, but who's the person that team is suffering because they have an opening? Who's the person who is feeling the pain of that? That's going to be the hiring manager that recruiting is going to want to work with. That's going to be usually the same hiring manager who's going to partner with human resources in managing that person for performance management and, you know, their whole career there. So we want to talk about, you know, how to get the job order, when we get that. Ideally, that's going to be early on in the process. That's going to be ideally even perhaps at like corporate strategy meetings. What kind of growth do we want to have in 18 and 2020? What kind of staffing team is that going to take, or what kind of staffing strategy is that going to need? Are we going to have to bring in external resources? Are we going to have to build up an in-house recruiting team? What is that going to look like? Recruiting needs to calibrate with the hiring manager so that we're having an efficient process, that we're not wasting time interviewing candidates that aren't a good fit, or, you know, interviewing for skill sets that don't matter, making sure that, you know, if we are missing candidates or we're not bringing in the right people, how can we, you know, sort of bring that back? The interviewing process, you know, is it fair? Is it efficient? Is it effective? The key piece of this in a lot of ways is like, who is responsible for this? In some companies, the question mark may exist. We don't know. Who's responsible for recruiting? Whose job is it to fill this funnel? Whose job is it to take the job order, to post it, to fill the pipeline? If it's 5 different people, who do you push on? I know when I consult with companies, it's me. They come directly to me and they say, what is the problem? What can we do to fix this? And so you really need somebody to own it, which is a lot of why, you know, kind of advocate to have recruiting on its own. So you have somebody who owns it. As you continue to go through this process, you know, maybe you're working with marketing departments, you're working with a lot of other, you know, people in the company to, you know, work on the branding or the logos or how the job descriptions are written or what articles are going out there, what kind of information we're putting in our email pitches to candidates. You know, we'll use people throughout the company to help close candidates as well once we identify somebody that we want. You know, how do we make sure they're going to join our company and not another? And then, you know, that transition to onboarding and then all the things that human resources does so well. One thing we had talked about here was, you know, kind of the cost of not doing this versus the cost of investing in recruiting. And one of the last stats out there talks about unfilled jobs in the U.S. Costing companies $160 billion in 2014. So that's a lot. I know a lot of you probably feel the pain in your companies as well, for, maybe missed deadlines or having to pay overtime for staff to make deadlines, maybe not being able to put new markets out or new products out, or be able to, give the kind of care that you would want to patients. This is another important reason to have a budget and to have somebody who owns this, and has a budget and has an appropriate amount of, obviously staffing. So actual recruiters, maybe recruiting coordinators to schedule interviews, which is a surprisingly time-consuming thing. People who, can kind of go out and reach out to new candidates. A lot of the things, some of which Sabrina showed you too, are various recruiter tools. So LinkedIn Recruiter is quite expensive, but gives you access to every candidate on LinkedIn and their profile. There's things like Connectifier you can purchase with that, or there's Lucia that's out there now too, that will give you email information or phone numbers for candidates. There's applicant tracking systems. So I know, most of you have an HRIS system, but how long does a candidate sit in that system? Are they basically pushed out after a year if they've applied and they're not hired? You want to have some kind of a record of the people that you have interviewed before. Maybe they weren't a good fit today, but they will be in a year. Maybe they're not a good fit for this position A today, but they'll be a good for position B. There's all kinds of, artificial intelligence, AI, like virtual assistant stuff coming out onto the market. I think some of that potentially has a space. You kind of want to, again, think about the candidate experience and if that's good. Social media, advertising budgets, or social media, just, kind of campaigns. LinkedIn can do that kind of stuff as well, which we didn't do specifically ads in this pilot, but could potentially be a phase 2. And really, it's kind of what Dean had talked about before. A lot of what we're focused on here with this recruiting piece is, what do we do for today? When we're going to look at what we do 4 years from now, we're going to involve the community, educational curriculums, learning and development, HR, recruiting, all those people are going to be involved. But this is about, what do we do today? How do we deliver hires today for, this year and maybe next year? What is our process then? So we've kind of looked at our organizational structure. We've got that set up. Now what do we do? What is our interview process? How do we identify candidates? How do we attract them, engage them, close them? And then what is our company's digital identity? What do people find out about us if we choose not to be online or on a specific platform? Is that good or bad? Are people still going to be able to find things, or are they going to infer things from not seeing that information? Actually, let me just see here. Okay, we'll stay here for a second. For the interview process, I think it's really important. Again, do we have a process that looks like this? If this is the case, look at each step in the process and ask, does it have value? What is the value to this process? If there's 1,000 candidates, a lot of it has value. If there's 4 candidates, does this make sense? If you had a star candidate who was in this process and they got stuck in the queue, who would know? Or what if that candidate, this actually happened, what if that candidate is somebody who's from maybe the Evansville area, or knows somebody within the company, or is just a incredibly star candidate? How would you know that? And then who would they talk to? So I think there's actually people that have moved away from Evansville that maybe wanted to be there because they just got stuck in the system, in the process, in an ATS somewhere, and nobody knew they were there. And had they known, maybe would have expedited the interview process. We want to have consistent, fair processes, but we also want them to be flexible in those cases, because those cases do exist where you have exceptional candidates and you want to hire them. Another example too is I had a someone that I met in San Francisco who was from the Grand Rapids area. And he was very, very excited to move back to Grand Rapids this year. So I'll put Grand Rapids in the same category as Evansville. He came back and just had some really negative interviewing experiences and had people not get back to him or like verbally promise that they wanted to hire him, but that did not follow up with written offers. And he actually started thinking that maybe this wasn't the place he thought it was. Like maybe this really wasn't home anymore, that it wasn't nice to him anymore. And I think that's so sad, especially as a city in the Midwest. Like we want people to come back to us, especially once they've gone out and explored other things. One thing to think about with your interview process too is what's your time to fill? How long does it take for somebody to get through this process? And then how long are your jobs open? Are they open for a year? Are they open for 3 weeks? That's a metric that you want to look at. Another example, not to be too much here with the examples, but my husband is in the government sector, and he applied for a position that I think it took them 3 months to make offers. And by the time they made offers, nobody accepted them because so many people had dropped out of the process or had taken other offers, or they had weeded them out through a process that looked surprisingly like this, where they would schedule multiple tests and like tell people when they would show up to take them. And so it's just a really, really interesting example of losing great talent. The other thing too, as we sort of talked about, is what is your candidate experience? If you don't track that, you should. Maybe send surveys, maybe, ask people, check Glassdoor is something we'll look at again. People can talk about their interview process specifically or the process of working there. How do you identify, attract, engage, and close candidates? So this is something we could talk about for days. But to start with, how do we identify talent? One of the first things to really think about is active versus passive candidates. So an active candidate would be somebody who's actively looking. They maybe don't have a job or they really hate their boss and they're looking today. Passive candidates are going to be those who are happy in their current position. They're not actively looking, so you're really going to have to sell to get them out of there. But those are typically, some of your strongest candidates. One way to do this is through job boards. Obviously, I think most people are familiar with that. The Monsters, Dice, Indeed, posting. You can put job postings there. You can also search for candidates who post their resumes. One thing to think about there is what the applicant process is like. How long is it taking people to apply? What is their experience? 50% of candidates use their phones to apply for positions these days. And this is a LinkedIn stat, so I think, it's maybe not that for every industry, but that's a lot. And some job applications on LinkedIn will actually allow you to do a one-click where you just basically submit with the touch of a button and you submit your application. Some of the older HRIS systems or recruiting processes, like my husband in the government, require you to enter so much information that it can take an hour, right? Putting that basically burden on the candidate, having to upload transcripts, birth certificates of your firstborn child. Kidding, but it can take a very long time. Sometimes the software is very outdated, so it'll lose information if you don't manually save it, something a lot of us don't really do these days anymore. So really think about how time consuming that process is. The other thing is employee referral programs. So that could be one way to identify talent, also to engage and attract and close as well. But your employees know the culture, they know what you're doing at your company. They're a great way to find other talent. So you can do things like offer incentives, offer bonuses for candidates that are hired, create incentives to give names of potential candidates, whether it's with their name or even just hey, I don't want my name used, but I know this person's really great. We can also look at sitting with employees. So if you have recruiters can actually sit down, go through some of their maybe LinkedIn profiles, their Facebook accounts, help them identify people, message people, perhaps even message from their account. You can even get referrals from candidates. So those who are working through like external RPO companies, are they doing that? Like, are they really pushing good candidates they talk to who aren't interested for the names of other candidates that might be a good fit? The applicant tracking system is something we talked about as well. So that might be something to look into. Should you get a greenhouse or a lever, or there's all kinds of different applicant tracking systems, none of which are perfect, but can kind of help with that process, help structure the interview process, help you search resumes of candidates that maybe weren't a fit at one time but could be. Social media is an obvious one. One of the main things of this pilot that we have. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, using social media to target candidates is really great. LinkedIn is an obvious one for recruiters. Most recruiters use it. But in a lot of ways, I think Facebook is potentially where recruiters will be going, because we can look at the psychographic, demographic, geographic profiles of people, basically. For example, if I'm working for a company in the educational technology space, maybe I want somebody who has kids or who's just coming out of school, or if I'm working for a company that has particularly good work-life balance, maybe I want somebody who is a working parent, or who knows, if you're making whatever. Basically looking at different things that would help people be engaged and identify with your company. Also, when you're on social media, you can have your employees or other people share job postings, more easily talk about opportunities that are out there. And then another way, clearly would be using external agencies. So the RPO providers that will basically kind of outsource your process to them. You can use contingency recruiters or headhunters for usually pretty specific positions, and you just pay on a contingency basis if you hire someone. You can hire contract recruiters or build your in-house team. Tons of different opportunities there. The engage piece, the attract and engage. Personally, I'm a huge fan of personalization, or at a minimum, really kind of thinking about the persona. Sabrina showed one of those, a couple of those that we talked to and sort of profiled some nurses, for example, got an idea what they might like and tried to steer some of the ads to those particular people. Another example would be truck drivers. My brother and my dad are in the trucking business and have a lot of difficulties right now hiring truck drivers. So, clearly if we're going to do an ad, we might do something a little bit different for the interests of truck drivers than we would maybe for the interests of nurses. There's other ways to engage people as well, maybe having like your higher level directors, managers, executives reach out for positions can sometimes be important. Looking at just kind of that social media interaction, even looking at culture. So this is something where HR can be really helpful. Is our culture what we want it to be? What are our values? Really looking at employee engagement, maybe talking about diversity and inclusion, helping people to work well together and accept and understand and value differences. So looking at different ways to kind of show people that they would fit at your company, and that you want them to be there. The closing talent. So personally, I really am a big believer that the best way to close a candidate is the first conversation that you have with them. So do you have one person who's interacting with somebody throughout the whole process, or are they kind of like a pinball in a machine? When I first talk to somebody, I want to know, and I ask them, if you could create the perfect opportunity, what does that look like? Location, culture, role, growth, team, whatever. Are there other people who are going to weigh in on this decision for you? If you're relocating, there's obviously tons of different things. When are you going to get your bonus? All that kind of stuff. How are you going to make this decision? And then when you're getting towards the end, you can, kind of use those things to help them identify if this is the right opportunity, and if it is, to close them. maybe bring in the managers or executives, or really kind of help craft your reason they should join to the things that are important to them. The other thing is accelerated process. So obviously, if you have those really great people that you want, it's an obvious fit. How can you still go through the process and be fair, but make it happen fast? Lastly, and a metric to look at is if you are not able to close candidates, or they're not making it through the process, or something's happening, do you know why? Are you maybe not offering competitive benefits? Are you not offering competitive pay? Does your company have a horrible reputation people are concerned about? Another company offering better flex hours, faster process? Be able to identify those things and be able to talk about them at an executive level, at a manager level, at a team level. It's all very important things. And one of the last things here is that your company's digital identity. So, companies have various philosophies there about what's important, where they want to be, whether, maybe budgets don't want a presence on Facebook, for example, because it's expensive to maintain, or maybe branding isn't something that's out there, or they don't want candidates posting. But the reality of it is that candidates are going to find information about you one way or another. For example, there's something called Glassdoor. This is an example of Glassdoor. There's companies on here. You can, of course, pay thousands of dollars to have a better site on Glassdoor, but there's generally going to be one anyway. People can post hear what they like about it, what the interview process is like, whether they approve of leadership or recommend it to a friend. You can see here there's some major dips in this. It ended up being stuff I was reading through. I picked Twitch because I actually don't know much about them. But they were just talking about how middle management was growing too fast, and they didn't really feel like executive management was responsive to the things that were important. They weren't prioritizing what was best for teams. All things that typically maybe wouldn't get out there 20 years ago, but are very much out there today. So candidates are going to get their information from Glassdoor, Facebook, friends. When we were doing this, we were looking at some postings of different people on Facebook. You can find a surprising amount about people that you don't know there and what they were saying about working at different locations for different companies, stock market. There's something here called the Muse too. So in the Bay Area, I don't know how widely used this is outside of that area, but the Muse is really great for startups, for example, or other companies. Kind of gives a snapshot of what it's like to work for the company. It actually, if you go to the site, it'll show you who works there. It'll give you kind of a tour of their offices, the perks they offer, their values. So there's lots of different ways to kind of get that information out there. Some companies I work with actually will reject candidates that haven't done their research, that haven't downloaded their app or haven't gone and researched a whole bunch of companies. They'll actually sometimes want people to pitch the company to them. So tell us why you want to work here. Tell us why this company is great. So it's something that is happening and is important. So really, in conclusion, it's a ton of information. Obviously, not everyone's an expert now in recruiting, but there are some things you can do as next steps. Really to take this information back and just to ask some questions in your company and to see what you can do about it. One, is the company committed to hiring in a competitive and evolving landscape? So do you want to compete? If you don't, then keep doing what you're doing. If it's not working, that's not good. If you do, it's gonna be something that's going to continue to evolve as technology continues to change and increase in our lives in almost exponential fashion. We're going to have to continue to evolve. How can you create, if you don't have talent acquisition, or how can you support talent acquisition if you do? How will you measure that success? Obviously hires, but there's a lot of different steps along the way as to what's working, what's not. What improvements can you make to the recruiting process? How can you enhance the candidate experience? Think about your experience. Maybe think of some candidates you've had go through the pipeline recently, or people you know. what improvements can you make to the interview process? Can you make it more agile? Can you speed it up? Can you eliminate maybe some steps that aren't maybe assessing anything important at this time? How can you enhance your company's digital identity? So is that something that you need to create a presence somewhere, or modify or mitigate maybe some other information that's out there? How can you create a compelling reason for people to want to join? And how can you implement some of these methods of identifying, attracting, engaging, or closing candidates? All good questions to ask, and happy to talk about any of them now. I think we're going to go into some Q&A.
So Dean, I don't know, thought possibly you might want to lead it. If there are any specific questions that people are asking questions, we'll get the questions from anybody who's here with us today. If they have specific ones, we'll send those along to you as well.
Thank you, Greg. Actually, what I'd like to do next is just to talk, and if you see your screen at the lower bottom hand, sorry, at the lower end of your screen, you'll see a control panel, and at the bottom of that, you'll see a place where it says questions. And if those of you who do have questions could type them into that control panel, that would be helpful to all of us. One question we have so far is, will we be sending out the PowerPoint, I think is what the question that was being asked is about. So my understanding is we will be sending it out to answer your question, and we'll be offering those through the Economic Development Coalition. So they'll contact them, and we'll each of us send our slides to Sabrina so she can share those with you. A couple of questions that I was working on, and while I wait for you to formulate yours, and I guess this may be for you, Kara, but what incentives do you see companies offering employees as part of their recruitment efforts?
Well, I mean, I think it depends where you are and sort of what the challenges are. So, I mean, in the Bay Area, for example, for engineers or different things, I mean, there's, signing bonuses and the, 20s of thousands of dollars. There's extra stock that might be added, clearly relocation bonuses. That's something we've talked about a lot too with Walter and the layoff database is, we haven't seen the flow there that we wanted to see, and we're thinking a lot of that, especially in some of the more hourly positions, is perhaps even that people can't relocate. If you're sort of in a paycheck to paycheck situation, would you have the funds to be able to put money into a new lease, get out of your old one, pay for a van, move your family? So having things like that. I think we even had some conversations about, if you had nurses, for example, coming out and had a lot of student debt and loans, if there was a small stipend that could help them get set up again in an apartment, or sometimes even paying back loans if people are there for a certain period of time. But I think specifically when you get into the relocation piece, or you get into situations where people have bonuses they're waiting for or something, it can, you can get creative and do what you have to do to get the talent you need.
I understand. What is the best time to recruit someone? And we've talked a little bit about stage of life, looking at people's Facebook page. What's been your experience at the stage of life or the timing? And what is the best time to recruit someone?
I mean, I think it depends on the position and the company. Depending on what you need, I think bad times to recruit people are when they have a baby that's just about to be born. I've definitely not had success there. I think that's too much change for people sometimes. Or when there's, something very personal happening, like, a death of a loved one or something like that. Those would maybe not be great times. But in a lot of ways for relocation specifically, we've looked at finding people who are at that stage of life where maybe they want to change. Personally, I was out on the West Coast from the Midwest, and I was single but not liking the people I was dating out there. And I thought if I wanted to get married, I wanted to do that in the Midwest. And if I wasn't in the Midwest, it'd be hard to drag someone from California. So I came back and, met a guy, had some kids, had some dogs, whatever, living the dream. But looking at people who are either, single and wanting to move back potentially, or are just married, maybe wanting to get home because they're anticipating having a family, or, maybe they have family already and they realize how difficult it is to be away from family. I think it's always worth looking at, but those tend to be some really, really great times. And I also would really like to see kind of watching people who are graduating from schools and then going out to a coast or going somewhere else and keeping tabs on them and encouraging them to come back after a couple of years once they've had that experience.
There's a question that just come in. What was there anything that surprised the team from the pilot? And I guess that's for all of us. Sabrina, what surprised you?
Sorry, that's a good save there, Greg. Never seen you move that fast. I think just we had quite the outpouring of candidates from Puerto Rico, and that was kind of a surprise. But just the calls that I have been making to the leads, people are genuinely interested. And I've only had one person that hung up on me. So, but people are really open to this type of communication.
Yeah, Dean, this is Greg. I think a couple of things we learned. One, we kind of thought sometimes for someone to consider an employment opportunity, it's not just the opportunity, the process becomes a barrier. So for that a company uses. And so that was maybe a little surprise to us. I think too is that we could literally track, in particular as with the A/B testing, if we changed images and we looked at things, we saw an uptick in how people responded. So the speed in which you can change and you can react to how people are reacting to looking at the ads and you're interacting with them is probably much quicker and a faster pace than what we thought, which kind of leads one to believe then your response in recruiting people in talent acquisition needs to be rather quick because they're looking for opportunities out there. And as Kara said, I think one of the things that we came back to is that if we can demonstrate and show people not only the opportunity exists here, but we've got a pathway to get them to relocate here, then I think we have a legitimate opportunity to get people to actually move here. So we have some work to do in that regard, and those were a couple of things that I picked up from it.
Kara, what about you? What surprised you?
I think that one of the biggest surprises to me was the process. I think in a lot of ways, again, most of my experience, in all honesty, is with smaller, earlier stage startups that typically have no process, and that's part of why I'm brought in, is to help them create and establish that process and to hire people. So I think working, and I have worked with largest corporation in the world as well, but again, kind of tried to carve out a side niche, I guess, that would help us to mostly avoid a lot of that process and to expedite it. So I think thinking about the process and then just trying to figure out how to have a point person for these candidates to have a landing, I think it's difficult. And then also, how sustainable is it going to be for the coalition, or how cost effective is it going to be? Are you going to need to have kind of a professional recruiter at all times, kind of figuring out what's important to these candidates and then knowing every single job opportunity at every single company in the Evansville area to be able to push them there. So I think trying to figure out that process. I think the other thing too was the success of Facebook surprised me in some ways because I have not done that. I personally think there's a lot of future there for recruiting. But we actually, I'm going to answer Gina's question here, if that's all right in this. She asked if you had to compare sourcing on LinkedIn for maintenance technicians versus Facebook, which would you say is more successful? And I would say Facebook by far. And I think, again, that's going to be something kind of looking at the platforms you're using and where people are. Would it be likely for maintenance technicians to be on LinkedIn? Yes, we saw them there. We did engage with them there, but way more so on Facebook. Whereas, you know, maybe if you're looking at I don't know, a recruiter, for example, they're probably on LinkedIn a whole lot. So that would be a good spot to find them.
Interesting. One of the things that surprised me, I guess, was the internal processes of the companies and how that can be a barrier to their success at recruiting people. And I guess that was one. And the other that surprised me was, at least I couldn't clearly see, other than maybe one or two cases in our pilot companies, where anyone had a clear designated responsibility as being the recruiter for that company. And so there's kind of a void on a lot of companies as to who has that responsibility. And I think you hit that really well, Kara, in terms of somebody needs to own that for these companies. And so that was one. One of the other questions I have down here was, what are some of the common mistakes companies make in recruiting employees? What are some of the well, obviously delaying responding would be one, but what are some of the other common mistakes companies make?
Dean, if I can go back really quick to something you just said, in talking about somebody who owns recruiting, I think it's really important to also note how many other things they own. For example, if it's going to kind of roll up to or something to like a plant manager, for example, to own recruiting, or maybe like the hiring manager to own the recruiting for his or her team, or HR who just assumes that responsibility or has it in addition to everything else. What does the staffing look like? How many other responsibilities do they have? If, you know, you're HR, for example, and you're spending most of your time putting out fires or, you know, getting hiring paperwork together, offboarding candidates, like how are you going to realistically make that time? So making sure that if somebody owns it, that they have a realistic amount of time set aside to make this a priority, not just to kind of throw it on someone's plate because they're not at work that day.
They missed that meeting and now they're it, right?
Exactly.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing, Kara, in talent recruiting? What are some of the trends out there that are happening? You touched on some of those.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing a lot is that, you know, people don't really like recruiters. So I think there's this desire to get rid of them, especially in the Bay Area where we, you know, kind of hound people, especially engineers. So the desire to sort of make AI or like some kind of alternative process, sort of just get rid of people in it or the recruiting aspect. So I think there are some of those things that will be very successful and then others that, you know, will probably be less so. I think the interesting thing about recruiting, you know, that I didn't really touch on too much, but I guess it's sort of obvious, is that my husband actually likes to joke because technically I'm a lawyer, but I don't practice. So a lot of, you know, degrees and money and you know, passing the bar and all that kind of stuff go into that very regulated profession. And now I find myself in a profession that has absolutely zero regulation. There's no industry standard. You can't go to school for it. Some places might offer some certification, but there's not even, you know, there's not even a board of ethics. We're not even like realtors. We don't have a guide like that. And so I think that's something that, you know, personally I'm kind of hoping to change in the United States. And I think over time we'll see that develop as more of a profession. But at this point, you know, can have somebody with a third grade education and maybe, not a lot of integrity, go out and hang a shingle and call themselves a recruiter. So, yeah, I think that's something, something to kind of think about in looking at all of this. And so I think a lot of those trends are helping to give more insight into what recruiting does, give more kind of process to it, whether that's an application or some kind of, database or, some kind of artificial intelligence, robot that's going to interact with people.
I've heard of some new applications out there called ZipRecruiter, which is actually a passive recruiter artificial intelligence application. So I think there's some things coming down the pike that are going to look pretty interesting in terms of what they do. And Kara, I think you mentioned when we were talking before the webinar, following up after you hire someone to make sure that that position turned out to be what they expected, and also with the employer to make sure that that was a good fit.
Definitely. I mean, because I think that's the thing with recruiting too, is that, again, you kind of want to watch the recruiters that you have or that you're partnering with externally, but ideally, it's expensive to hire people. It's expensive not to have the people that you need, but ultimately you don't want to have to replace them or have them leave. So you want to make sure you're evaluating the right things in the interviewing process itself. And that's a huge help with the relationship between the hiring manager and the new employee and HR. And that's where a lot of that kind of collaboration and intersection happens, to make sure that the candidate, had the right expectations coming in, that when they get there, everything is as they sort of thought it would be. If it's not, that they're getting that support, and just kind of making sure that, people it's a big thing, changing jobs, we spend a lot of our time there. Hopefully it's, fulfilling to us for those people looking for work-life balance, or investing themselves into their careers. Want to make sure they're doing well.
I don't see any more questions on our list, so we can maybe do a last call for questions, and we can close out our webinar for today. I want to thank our panelists for their participation. You folks have done a great job of articulating the pilot project, what it's about, why we did it, and what some of the results have been. So thank you very much to the panelists. And most of all, thank you for our audience, the people that are participating both on site at the training room, but also those that are online. So we do appreciate you taking the time to listen to our webinar. And I'd like to thank you for doing that, because we appreciate that.
Dean, let me add one last thing. Besides the applause there, thank you very much. I do want to add this, a couple of things, just to let you know in the pilot, what we tested a couple of things to make sure that you fully understand that. In responses, we tested emails, texting, and one-on-one phone calls. And I think we really found the most effective was still that one-on-one kind of that touch. And then one of the questions we had internally here was, were we going to be sharing the leads? The leads will only be shared right now with those pilot companies. I'd love to be able to say that that's the reason why we're testing this, because part of what we're doing now is taking the leads. We're going to be working as we transition those leads to the pilot companies and looking at conversions. So that's for this particular pilot. The next steps, what we want to do is, once we evaluate that, we're working with the consulting team, we're evaluating, looking at the validity of the process, looking at what we found, and then our hope is that we want to scale this out, and we'll start on that process sometime next year. And we say sometime next year, that's probably within the next 30 to 60 days looking at it, because of where we are at the end of the year. So I just wanted everybody to know, I think it's done a couple of things. It's proved the validity of the process, because we did get a lot of leads, probably more so than we thought, but it also told us we have a tremendous amount of work to do. Just in the pilot that we've done, we've had at least 3 people, sometimes 4, touch these individuals. So there's a lot of time and effort that goes about just getting to the point where, as we've done with the pilot, getting somebody just to be considered a bona fide lead. So, but it's told us a lot about our market. It's told us a lot about what images people react to, what messages they react to, and I think we've learned a great deal from this process. So I'll turn it back to you, Dean, but maybe close out.
Oh, thank you so much, Greg. And on behalf of our team, Greg, I'd like to thank your organization for taking the risk of having us do this pilot. So it's an unproven path that we took, and I'm delighted to say I think it's turned out well. So thank you for that, and thank you again to our team. And with that, we'll close out the webinar. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.